Good morning and welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It is Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022, and today is the third day of the historic confirmation hearings for Judge Katanji Brown Jackson, who seeks to become the first Black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. And let me tell you, let it be known, some of the Republican senators turned day two into a complete circus. We will discuss this morning with Let It Be Known correspondent and Washington Informer reporter James Wright. Attorney Robert Tarver of the Tarver Law Firm in New Jersey will also join us. But first this morning, Black Americans are shot by law enforcement at disproportionately higher rates than white Americans. Unarmed Black people are over 3 times more likely to be shot and killed by police compared to white individuals. The lack of trust between BIPOC communities and law enforcement creates the additional concerns, and the DC Justice Lab have joined others in putting together a racial equity impact assessment tool, to help lawmakers assess with the consideration of racial equity before policy is made. We discussed this morning with Dr. Bethany Young, the Deputy Director of the program, and she's also, of course, an attorney. Good morning, Dr. Bethany Young.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. Let's jump right into this. At first, let's talk about this too. What is a racial equity impact assessment?
Yes, so a racial equity impact assessment is a tool that can support policymakers, it can support advocates, and just impacted and concerned community members in identifying the factors that may bear on racial equity or inequity as they create and implement policy. And in particular, this tool is focused on helping policymakers, advocates, and community members identify racial equity or inequity implications of policies related to gun violence prevention.
So you guys put this together, the DC Justice Lab. I believe others were involved and assisted in that. How did you come up with it, and how's the tool used?
Yeah, so we collaborated on this effort with the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence. We received core support from the Joyce Foundation, and were joined by a few other organizations, and received the input, insight, and support of many experts in the field. And kind of the intro you gave before you brought me on is in a nutshell how we arrived at the need for this project. That Black people and Latino people and other BIPOC communities are disproportionately affected not only by state violence, by police violence, but also by community gun violence, and looking for a tool that would allow communities to address this epidemic of gun violence while making sure that they are not contributing to or exacerbating existing racial inequity.
Yeah, and as is brought out when folks read the report that's attached to this, the police violence against Black communities, the police gun violence. We talk about gun violence being a problem in this country, but it really hones in on that aspect. What do you find? I saw in that report, Aurora, Colorado was highlighted. Talk about that a little bit, and how it's just rampant throughout the United States, despite all these high profile cases, the George Floyd situation, where the officers were convicted, it's still going on. And we know George
Yeah,
Floyd, I'm
okay.
sorry, that didn't have a gun involved, but it's still interaction there.
Absolutely. And so I think there are 2 points that are important to make, and I'll get one specific about Colorado in my second point. But this kind of tool is important because it aims to address the root causes of violence in communities in ways that kind of very narrowly set the parameters around when law enforcement is involved at all. Law enforcement is reactive, it's not necessarily preventative or proactive. And so, if we can get to the root causes of gun violence in communities, we can avoid needing to involve law enforcement in the way that they get involved, where people lose their lives. And so, one of the aims of this project is to get communities to think seriously how can we address the problem of gun violence and the way that it affects our communities, because it affects every community differently, right? And how can we get to the root of that problem and not create more harm, and not create more harm in the form of Black people being killed by law enforcement. About Aurora specifically, I think Colorado is an interesting case because um, they have quite a high rate of gun suicides attributed to white men. So one of the communities most impacted by gun violence in Colorado is white men. Yet you still see a situation where Black people are experiencing the brunt of harsh law enforcement tactics, kind of with the goal purportedly of reducing gun violence. But if they narrowly tailored it, if they had done an analysis similar to what we suggest in this report, they can address the problem of gun violence and address it in the communities where they are most feeling most of that impact.
Yeah, one of the things that jumps out at me in reading it all is you want lawmakers to consider this racial equity impact assessment tool as they make policy. Talk about the importance of that.
Yeah, so this can be applied to policies that already exist, but ideally you're having this conversation before anything is on the books. And it's important that policymakers are making these decisions and are kind of are considering these decision points that we suggest in collaboration with the impacted communities. So that's, I think, for me, I'll say personally, I think that's the most crucial part of the inquiry, is who is going to be most impacted, not only by the policy you are planning to implement, but about the problem you hope the policy addresses, because the best solutions come from the communities who are impacted by the problem you're attempting to solve. And I think that's a really critical part of this project.
How long did it take to put this together?
All in all, a little over a year, and I think it was planned to take less time, but as we dug into it, it became apparent that we need to talk to more people, kind of in keeping with the spirit of the project itself. It became evident that we had to talk to the experts, and that included not just professional experts, but also people with lived expertise in making sure that whatever we put out was responsive to the calls and the efforts and the work that has already been done in this field by folks who have been working on it for a long time.
Yeah, the report mentions extreme risk protection orders, or ERPOs. What is that, and why is this important?
So ERPOs, that's one of the examples the report gives, kind of in how to apply this, how to use this tool. And the example they give is in Colorado specifically. An ERPO is a civil protection order that, before law enforcement gets involved, can intervene in a situation where someone has unsafe possession of a weapon. And ERPO is, I think, one of the better examples of policies because they do have various alternatives to law enforcement involvement um, to kind of address the potential danger of someone in possession of a gun. I think what the example in the report illuminates also is, when a policy is not kind of backgrounded or researched or done in collaboration with the community it's attempting to impact, it can, even with the best intentions and kind of the smartest strategies, can't have the impact that it's intended to without the buy-in of the people it's going to affect. So that's one of the test cases, if you will, that are included in the report to demonstrate how this tool could be working in support of policymakers.
Yeah, and we know that the hearings, the Supreme Court nomination hearings, confirmation hearings, I should say, are going on with Judge Katanji Brown Jackson. In that spirit of what's happening, this tool is how timely is that?
Yeah, I think what really stood out to me during Judge Jackson's hearings over the past couple of days has been um, the the claims she's had to address around her work in public safety as a public defender. And I think what's really interesting about kind of that thread of the confirmation hearings is that public safety and fairness are kind of put at odds to one another. When in reality, as some of the Congress people highlighted yesterday, um, those two things really are hand in hand, not in opposition. And it is kind of also the role of our justice system to uphold public safety, but not at the expense of people's lives, not in a way that that exacerbates racial inequity or isolates people or kind of treats people as discardable. And I think Judge Jackson, in her responses to those sometimes wild claims about her history as a defender, kind of it kind of makes very clear that point and makes clear her commitment to public safety, and that that's not something that makes her unqualified to serve in on the highest court in the land, but makes her eminently qualified to do so because of that firsthand experience and respect she has for both public safety and fairness.
Yeah, we're talking with Dr. Bethany Young, of the Deputy Director of the DC Justice Lab, who's also an attorney. So Dr. Young, these hearings, when you see Judge Katanji Brown Jackson, tell us the vibe that you, as a Black woman attorney, and others you may have spoken with in DC and around DC and wherever else you've spoken with them. What's the vibe?
I mean, at the outset, overwhelming pride and joy at seeing Judge Jackson shine in the way that she has, but also this kind of unpleasant familiarity in the way that she's been made um, to in the way that she's been questioned, her credentials, her experience, her even aspects of her personal life that have no bearing on the role that she's being interviewed to fulfill. It's Black women are all too often assumed to know less, to be able to do less. And everything about Judge Jackson, from her resume to the recommendations and endorsements she received, to the way that she held herself during these hearings, shows us all that she is, I think one of the Congress people said it yesterday, the most qualified in over 200 years to be considered for this role. And yet, she's being questioned and criticized for all manner of things that A, often didn't have anything to do with her, and two, certainly did not have anything to do with her ability to serve in this role. But I mean, I'd say I am, and my girlfriends and the other Black women I know are extremely proud and feel excited and energized about this woman being on our Supreme Court, but also all too familiar with the circus, as you said, that is happening right now.
Well, Judge Jackson mentioned yesterday about being a role model as a Black woman, and certainly you, Dr. Young, fit that bill as well. You've done a lot. You continue to do a lot, and we certainly are following your work, and we appreciate what you do. We invite you to stick around as we discuss the confirmation hearings of Judge Jackson with our panelists, Chief Legal Correspondent Robert Tarver of the Tarver Law Firm is with us. James Wright of the Washington Informer is with us. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
So let's jump right in, James. So listen, yesterday's hearing, I termed it, this is my words, it was a circus. As a reporter covering it, James, what did you get out of it?
I have to agree with you, Stacey. It was a circus, and it's supposed to be a serious proceeding. You're talking and questioning someone who will sit on the highest court in the land, that will make decisions that will reach well into this century. And instead of asking good, solid, thoughtful questions, people like Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Josh Hawley instead verged into sex and to reading children's books. And Lindsey Graham asked what her religion was. And, I felt that Judge Jackson had her Patricia Roberts Harris moment. And let me explain that very quickly. In 1977, Patricia Roberts Harris was nominated to be the Secretary of HUD, first Black woman to go on the presidential cabinet. William Proxmire, a Democrat, had reservations about her because thinking that she could not sympathize with poor people. And basically, Patricia Roberts Harris said, I sympathize with poor people. I'm a daughter of a Pullman porter. There were sections in this town where I couldn't buy a house a few years ago. The point is that I think that was her Patricia Roberts Harris moment. But unfortunately, she had to have that moment to straighten out Ted Cruz.
Well, before we go to Attorney Tarver, I think we have a clip from yesterday that we want to bring up here. So let's take a look at that.
You argued that the executive branch doesn't have that option. That if you had had your way, the executive branch could not do periodic reviews about the danger the detainee presents to the United States. They would have to make a decision of trying them or releasing them. Is that not accurate?
Respectfully, Senator, it was not my argument. I was filing an amicus brief on behalf of clients, including the Rutherford Institute, the Cato Institute, and the Constitution Project, who...
When you sign on to a brief, does it not become your argument?
It does not, Senator. If you are an attorney and you are representing a client in amicus...
Is that your position when you were in private practice? I mean, you sign on to this brief making this argument, but you say it's not your position. I mean, why would you do that if it's not your position? Why would you take a client that has a position like that? Now, this is voluntary. Nobody's making you do this.
Oh, Senator, I would refer you to the same sorts of statements that Chief Justice Roberts made when he came before the committee, which is that lawyers represent clients.
I get that. I'm not holding the client's views against you. The people you represent at Gitmo, they deserve representation. But this is a amicus brief where you and other people try to persuade the court to change policy. The policy I described is a periodic review. If the court had taken the position argued in the brief that you signed upon, we'd have to release these people or try them, and some of them, the evidence we can't disclose because it's classified. You're putting America in an untenable position. This is not the way you fight a war. If you tried to do this in World War II, they'd run you out of town.
Oh,
we
this
hold
is ridiculous.
enemy combatants as long as they're a threat.
That's ridiculous.
There's no magic passage of time that you got to let them go. So my question is very simple. Do you support the idea, did you support then the idea that indefinite detention of an enemy combatant is unlawful?
Respectfully, Senator, when you are an attorney and you have clients who come to you, whether they pay or not, you represent their positions before the court.
Attorney Tarver, please weigh in.
Yeah, think about the absurdity of that. If that were the case, if you're married to the client and the harm that the client produces is your harm, I'd have to be out of here because I've represented people in death penalty matters who have done some horrendous things. It's absurd. And there was a lot of absurdity that went on yesterday. But the problem is simply this. What they were doing yesterday was political theater. And what they were looking for yesterday were specific sound bites that they would see on Fox, One America News, and Newsmax. That's what was happening yesterday. That's why you saw a lot of posturing and very little actual questioning. The questions were loaded because they were meant to be that way, because they were never meant to be answered in such a way that it would make practical sense. They were meant to be answered for theater, and that's what they were doing.
Dr. Young, again, Dr. Young is also an attorney. You want to give us your takeaway from that particular exchange?
Yeah, I mean, and this is less as an attorney as just a reasonable observer, that this is that was emblematic of many of the questions Judge Jackson received yesterday that was not really about her response, but seemed to be about the questioners being able to get certain things out and in the record in public view. So I mean, and I think it also makes me question what our lawmakers understand about how an attorney-client relationship works.
Mm-hmm.
That theme appeared, I think, a couple times yesterday in a way that was really confusing to me about what do you understand about what it means for an attorney to represent a client.
Yeah, Attorney Tarver,
Yeah.
We talked about this yesterday. We talked about the decorum. It got worse. Yesterday morning we talked about it got worse. What are we looking at here? Are we looking at, and I think you kind of answered this already, but are we looking at what normally happens in these procedures?
Yeah, it has become a red meat for the base proceeding. And each of these sides will provide red meat. I got to tell you, there were some really highlight moments yesterday. I thought, first and foremost, Sheldon Whitehouse with the dark money portion, which he has done before in the Amy Barrett hearing, is very important because he set the stage to let people know what the process is all about, showing how dark money has bought these particular seats from the Federal Society and other places. But you look at the crazy arguments. I mean, child porn. Anyone who has practiced on the federal level knows that the federal guidelines have not accounted for cases like child porn. And every judge, I don't know a single judge that has not departed in some way from the federal guidelines with child porn and other cases. The guidelines are simply that. They are guidelines. So they try to hold her accountable for what every federal judge in the nation does. They depart from guidelines, and sometimes they go lower, and a lot of times they go higher. But it's the circumstances of the case which dictate where they go. And I it's interesting because the good doctor is being kind. I think that these legislators know exactly what the law says. I think they are being purposely deceptive. I think they are purposely acting in such a fashion that they can get these things out there. And I got to tell you, I watched Fox News last night, a rarity, but I watched Fox News last night because I wanted to see what was going to happen. And this will tell you how well it went for Judge Brown. They said on the 5 program, we just need to move on here. There's nothing that's going to be established. She's going to be confirmed. They're getting nowhere. And that tells you just how well she did and how good her temperament and demeanor was.
Yeah, as far as the child porn sentencing, she also mentioned that they ignored, but she mentioned not only does she give out the sentence, the prison time, but there's, as she said, decades of monitoring that comes after that, probation, monitoring and things of that nature. So all in all, what she was saying was that, as you said, Attorney Tarver, her sentencings are no different than other federal judges. James, what do we expect on day 3, which should be starting soon?
Well, I would expect some more theatrics from some of the Republican senators. I also expect stronger support from the Democratic senators. But I would also like to say, Stacey, I really wish the Senate would fulfill its role constitutionally to advise and consent and ask good questions to Judge Jackson. Just want to talk real quickly about Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay detainees. They may be criminals, but they are on American soil and they are due process. And that's something Lindsey Graham does not believe in. But this is what the Constitution mandates, and that they are due process. But I think he knows that. But like Attorney Tarver says, they will play into their base.
Yeah. John Cornyn was a judge. Senator John Cornyn has been a judge. He knows that when you file pleadings with the Gitmo case, you have to procedurally name the president as the executive officer. So that's something she had to do, or her pleadings would be deficient. She couldn't even move the case forward. So he's being purposely deceptive. He is purposely lying to the American people, and you have to ask yourself why he's doing that. Well, he's doing that so that people who look at this will say, oh my God, she actually named the president and said that he did X, Y, Z, but that's not the case. And we know it's not the case. And that's what I think these senators have to do. They have to start calling out the deception when you purposely see it, when you see it acting purposely.
Yeah, and Dr. Young, we talk about, I mean, you've heard Attorney Tarver, you've heard James Wright, but one thing that really should bug people as they watch these proceedings, and from where I sit, and I'm going to throw it to you, Dr. Young, and the fact that there are no peers of Judge Jackson in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, that stands in contrast to what Judge Jackson said yesterday about kind of why it's important to her that she receive this honor, is that so that other people, seeing the operation of government at the highest level, see people who look like them as part of it. And I think you raise a really important point, that how do we expect, not that people who don't look like me can't be fair to me, but how can I expect that my interests are represented, that the experience of myself, of my family, of people like me is represented, if there's no one like me represented? And I think that's just another reason why it is so important that Judge Jackson is where she is right now and poised to assume the role of Supreme Court Justice.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, again, we talk about the circuits, we talk about the theatrics, and just really the disrespect that Lindsey Graham and others displayed yesterday. How do you think voters look at Lindsey Graham and Senator Coons and others who just behaved abhorrently?
Well, their base politically, and this, Stacey, is declining. Dr. Chavis, when he comes on the show, often talks about the browning of America. And as these senators try to play to a white populace that is in decline, even in terms of philosophy, they're going to realize that political careers are going to be cut short. It's interesting you say Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz are looking at running for president in 2024. If they decide to do that, they won't come out on top, not just because of the antics of this hearing, but because their philosophy and the way they act is just way out of bounds. And people are going to see that for that.
Yeah. Attorney Tarver, real quick, what do you expect today?
Well, I expect more of the same. I actually do expect it to be somewhat tempered. She weathered the strong part of the storm yesterday, and I think everyone realizes that this is not a candidate who's going to be easily disturbed, who's going to be taken off of her game. People have to also understand this is an extremely grueling process. Yeah. All day being questioned, and not just questioned like a regular witness, but being questioned on some very serious, inane constitutional issues, the Ninth Amendment, originalism, all of those different things that she has got to really be on top of. So I think the senators realize that she's not an easy mark here, and I expect that they'll be backing off and we'll be moving toward her confirmation very soon.
Yeah, and finally, Dr. Young, what is your anticipation going forward with this process?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to what Attorney Tarver and Mr. Wright said. I think it seems like, or I'm hopeful that kind of the worst of it, the nastiest of it has passed, and that folks will concede that that she is suited for this role and complete the process and get her confirmed.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Young, again for bringing us that racial equity impact assessment to that is so important, and we certainly it intertwines with what we're discussing today as well, and you'll be hearing a whole lot more about that tool going forward. You should read more about it at blackpressusa.com, the Washington Informer, and other members of the National Newspaper Publicists Association. We'll continue to bring you updates on these confirmation hearings up until and including when Katanji Brown Jackson is confirmed as the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. We thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned, and we will see you tomorrow.